Hello, and thank you for taking the time to review this presentation from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. We are excited to provide an overview of our National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, and the second round of requests for proposals. The information being shared today is correct to the best of MnDOT's knowledge. NEVI is a program that is new for MnDOT, and we may experience some shifts in the timelines and process we provide within the presentation as the process matures. Should any changes be made to the RFP or attachments, those will be disclosed through an RFP addendum. I'd like to start by introducing you to the staff at MnDOT working on the NEVI program in our Office of Sustainability and Public Health. I'm Beth Croto-Callisted, and I'm a Sustainability Planner managing the NEVI program. Casey Stanek is our Grants and Contracts Coordinator and provides the day-to-day assistance for grantees, and Amber Dahlman is our Office Director. As we get started, I want to remind everyone that all up-to-date NEVI-specific material, including the RFP package, is located at the MnDOT NEVI website, which can be found at www.dot.mn.us/NEVI. We will also push out updates through our NEVI email list. You can sign up for these updates by clicking on the link located under the Connect with Us section on the right-hand side of the screen. If you scroll to the bottom of the NEVI program webpage, you will see the Request for Proposals area. Click on the down arrow on the Round 2 section, and it will open more information to include all the documents and resources we will cover today. Today we're going to cover the following topics: NEVI background, overview, and our goals for the program, applicant and cost eligibility, a tour of the request for proposal package with some important highlights for applicants, examples and mistakes to avoid, requirements the program must adhere to, how to apply to our NEVI program, how we will evaluate the applications we receive, and finally our timeline for awards. After listening to this overview and thoroughly reviewing the RFP package, we expect that some applicants may have questions. We will be taking questions via email through December 20th, 2024 at 5 p.m. Central Time. Questions can be submitted by sending an email to neviproject.dot@state.mn.us with the subject RFP question. Questions should identify the following information: RFP document name you have a question about, the RFP document section number and page number, and the question you have. Questions without this information will not be addressed. Applicants will not receive individual responses to questions. MnDOT will publish written responses on a rolling basis each Tuesday through December 24th, 2024. Questions that were asked during the live webinar on October 30th have been incorporated into the Q&A document. Any person requiring the RFP in an alternative format, such as Braille, large print, or in a different language, can receive it at no cost. Please email your request to accessibility.dot@state.mn.us or call 1-833-400-8432, Relay Service 711. Any person requiring a special accommodation due to a disability should contact MnDOT by email at adarequest.dot@state.mn.us for assistance with this RFP at least 5 business days prior to the activity or action for which assistance is needed. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, or NEVI program, is a new program for Minnesota as part of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. To orient you, I'm going to briefly go over the basics of the National NEVI program and provide an overview of our program here in Minnesota. The NEVI formula program was authorized under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in November of 2021. This program provides $5 billion to state DOTs to implement a convenient, affordable, reliable, and equitable nationwide charging network that is open to the public. Minnesota is receiving a total of approximately $68 million in funding over a 5-year period through this program. $47 million is available to be used to fund this RFP. The initial focus of the NEVI program is building out a fast charging network along all EV alternative fuel corridors, or AFCs. Charging stations off the AFC network and level 2 chargers will not be allowed under this RFP. These will be considered in the future after the AFC network is certified as fully built out. The alternative fuel corridors in Minnesota are I-35, I-90, and I-94. NEVI requires charging stations be located no more than 50 miles apart and no more than 1 mile off the corridor. Each charging station must provide at least 4 charging ports capable of providing 150 kilowatts per port simultaneously. Stations must be available to the public 24 hours per day, 365 days per year, with no membership required for use. This RFP is the second round of our NEVI implementation in Minnesota and focuses on filling the gaps along I-35 and I-94 from round 1 and adding in new locations along I-90. The RFP is a competitive selection process that makes NEVI funds available for both new charging stations and upgrades to existing charging stations, with the goal of building out a complete charging network that meets all the NEVI formula program requirements. The RFP is focused on the design, construction, acquisition, installation, operation, maintenance, and ownership of charging stations along the AFCs. MnDOT will not own, operate, or maintain any charging equipment. Instead, MnDOT is looking for partners who will own, operate, and maintain the equipment for a minimum period of 5 years. Achieving full build-out of the AFCs in Minnesota is expected to require the installation of up to 14 charging stations. The general locations of the stations have been identified as clusters of interchanges where applications will be accepted. These clusters were selected to optimize an efficient build-out of the AFC charging network within Minnesota. MnDOT anticipates awarding a single site within each cluster as part of this RFP. Federal NEVI funds can be used for up to 70% of the total eligible project costs, and the Minnesota legislature has provided funding for an additional 20%, meaning that applicants can seek up to 90% total reimbursement through this RFP. The applicant must provide at least 10% of the total eligible cost. However, applicants may propose a lower reimbursement amount as part of their application. Now we will review eligibility of applicants and costs. Eligible applicants include, but are not limited to, for-profit businesses, privately owned electric utilities, nonprofit organizations, governmental entities, tribal nations, utilities, teaming partnerships that include the above eligible entities with a clear primary applicant and point of contact. Ineligible applicants include entities or individuals that are currently suspended or debarred by the state of Minnesota or the federal government. Other requirements include each application can only include one site. Applicants may submit only one application per cluster. Applicants may submit applications for more than one cluster. Applications for locations outside of the identified 14 clusters will not be accepted. The RFP document contains a list of all the clusters and eligible exits and a map. There is also an online mapping tool on the NEVI program webpage under the Round 2 guidance area. The RFP provides full details, but here is a highlight of eligible capital costs. Grantees will be reimbursed for eligible costs according to the cost proposal form attachment 4. Applicants may apply for grant funds for up to 90% of the eligible costs, with a minimum required match of 10% to be provided by the applicant. Eligible costs are expenses deemed to be eligible by 23 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 680, and 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart E Cost Principles. A list of eligible capital costs is provided on pages 3 and 4 of the RFP. Funds can be used for upgrades as well as new EVSE. It should be noted that eligibility of costs applies to all proposed NEVI-compliant ports on the project, not just the minimum ports. Some examples of eligible capital costs are utility upgrades, on-site electrical service equipment and installation, EVSE equipment, construction site work, pre-construction design and environmental review, local permitting, warranties, and fees. Here's an overview of eligible operations and maintenance costs. Additional detail can be found in the RFP on page 4. Note that electricity costs, including demand charges, are an eligible expense for any amount above the average price for electricity paid by businesses. The warranty can either be a pre-purchased 5-year warranty included in capital costs, or it can be paid yearly as O&M. It cannot be both. You must choose if you'd like it to be an upfront capital cost or a yearly O&M cost. The same is true for the EVSE. It can either be an upfront purchase as a capital cost or a lease paid yearly as part of O&M. You must choose one option. Administrative costs to manage the program, including the data reporting of quarterly, annual, or one-time data as required under 23 CFR 680.112, are eligible. Keep in mind that all eligible reimbursements must be included in your cost proposal. Unforeseen costs that were not included in your cost proposal will not be reimbursable. Based on feedback from the Round 1 process, MnDOT is allowing fees associated with cybersecurity risk assessments and audits, as well as letter of credit fees, to be eligible as administrative costs. The list of ineligible costs can be found on pages 4 and 5 of the RFP document. There are a few highlights on ineligible costs we want to note. Costs incurred prior to a fully executed agreement with MnDOT are ineligible. Costs for additional ports or chargers that are not compliant with 23 CFR 680 are ineligible. Level 2 chargers if reimbursement is sought for the Level 2 chargers. Utility service upgrade costs covered by the utility and indirect costs are all ineligible. Now we will review the contents of the RFP package. The RFP can be found on the MnDOT NEVI program webpage. Scroll to the Request for Proposal section at the bottom of the page. Click on the down arrow to the right on the Round 2 section, and the page will open with details about the timeline, guidance, questions and answers, and steps to apply. This is the beginning of the How to Apply section with links to all the application materials that includes the NEVI RFP. The RFP document outlines the goals and priorities for the program eligibility, project requirements, how to apply, scoring criteria, the evaluation process, pre-award and post-award activities. Now we'll walk through each of these attachments. Attachment 1 to the RFP is the technical requirements. We want to highlight a few important technical requirements. The first is requirement 1.1, distance from the AFC. The project site shall be within a maximum driving distance of 1 mile from the AFC. If the proposed project site is 1.01 miles, it is too far and will not be considered compliant with the requirements. Another important requirement is 2.4, output current limit. The output current may be the lower of 350 ADC or the current required to reach 150 kilowatts based on the output voltage. All combinations of voltages and current that fall within the required operation area in Figure 1 must be supported by the EVSE. The third requirement of note is 2.6, North American Charging Standard or NACS connectors. Each DCFC port must have at least one permanently attached NACS connector in addition to the required CCS Type 1 connector. The final requirement of note is 2.7, minimum power supply. The utility feed to the project site shall have a minimum power capacity of at least 150 kilowatts per port, and the EVSE shall have an input power rating of at least 150 kilowatts per port. If the proposed project does not meet this requirement, it will be considered non-compliant. All charging ports shall be capable of providing a continuous power output of at least 150 kilowatts simultaneously from each charging port at the charging station. The third document in the RFP package is Attachment 2, Scope of Work and Deliverables. The scope of work identifies the tasks, schedule, and deliverables required for each grantee upon the selection of a site. After confirmation of the successful completion of each task, MnDOT will issue a notice to proceed to the next task. Please review this document carefully to understand the expectations. Attachment 3, Technical Application Form, is to be completed for each proposed project. Applicants must complete each section of this form and provide all required information and documents. The maximum number of pages shall be 30 pages, including text, graphics, tables, charts, and photographs. Resumes and technical specification cut sheets do not count toward the 30-page limit. Each question must be answered, and teams can choose how they allocate space in completing the form within the 30-page limit. Links to information outside of the form shall not be used and will not be reviewed. A couple of specific items to note in the technical application form. Toward the end of the form, there is an administrative responsiveness check and a technical responsiveness check. These lists serve as checklists for you to confirm that you have included or appropriately addressed each of the list items within the application. Remember to check either the yes or no box next to each requirement, confirming if you have met the requirement, as well as including the document and application page number where confirmation of the requirement can be found. If either of these checklists are not completed, the application may be considered non-compliant. Page 24 of the application includes a summary list of all the items that must be included in the application, including the additional documents and signatures that must be provided with Attachment 3. If any one of these documents is not provided, the application may be considered non-compliant. An important reminder, there are several places where authorized signatures are required. Don't forget to sign each as indicated. Each application must also include a completed Attachment 4 cost proposal form. Applicants are to enter information only in the yellow cells. The formatting and formulas are not to be adjusted. The cost proposal requires applicants to include costs for each individual line item. If no cost is anticipated for a particular item, 0 should be entered. If a proposed cost item does not appropriately fit into the provided line items, it should be added into the other cell within each category, and a description must be provided in the corresponding description cell. There are a couple of cost items that can only be included in either the capital costs or the O&M costs. These include the costs of the EVSE and warranties. The O&M costs must also be provided for each individual line item for each year of O&M. Applicants must also provide the requested reimbursement percentage for both capital costs and O&M costs. O&M requested reimbursement percent must be the same for all 5 years. Attachment 7 is the Federal Highway Administration Form 1273 that includes a signature page on page 1. This form provides the required contract provisions for federal aid construction contracts that the NEVI program falls under. These 3 attachments are not submitted as part of the application and are informational for applicants. Attachment 5, Optional Utility Coordination Form, is a tool for applicants to use to help solicit information from utilities. Attachment 6, Grant Agreement Round 2, is a sample agreement that awardees will have to sign upon award. It is the contract between MnDOT and the grantee. The agreement outlines requirements and procedures that awardees must follow. Attachment 8, Sample Letter of Credit, is an example for applicants as the information and requirements that must be provided by awardees in their letter of credit. This letter of credit is required if an applicant is offered an award as part of contract execution. Applicants are strongly urged to conduct their due diligence as it relates to the NEVI formula program and the federal, state, and local laws that apply to this funding. Recommended reference documents are listed here and included in the RFP. These are the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Standards and Requirements, 23 CFR 680, the FHWA NEVI Formula Program Guidance, the FHWA NEVI Program Frequently Asked Questions, and MnDOT's NEVI Program website. We will now review some examples of acceptable station submittals and mistakes to avoid. Let's begin by reviewing some definitions that are key to NEVI-funded stations and should be referred to when completing this RFP. A station is the area where chargers are located. A charger is the equipment that converts power to use. A port is a single output from the charger that can charge one vehicle at a time. Each port can be associated with a single vehicle that it can charge due to the way that a port is defined. If a charger is capable of charging more than one vehicle, then that charger has more than one port. For example, the charger in the middle of the graphic is a dual port charger, and the chargers on each side are single port chargers. A connector is the physical connection to the car, and there are multiple types. Each port in the graphic has two connectors. 3 of the ports have a single cabled connector and an adapter for the second connector. One of the ports in the middle right has 2 separate cables for the 2 connectors. Since the 2 separate cables are part of a single port, it would not be possible to charge 2 vehicles at the same time with those connectors. For all the other ports, the second connector is provided through an adapter, which makes it more obvious that only one of the connectors can be used at a time. To be compliant with the NEVI requirements, all ports must be able to provide 150 kilowatt to all vehicles at the same time. This diagram is one example of a station configuration that would meet the RFP requirements. It has 4 separate chargers at 150 kilowatts each with 1 port and 2 connectors. In this example, we see 2 chargers that are dual ports, with each port having 2 connectors. These chargers have 300 kilowatt power that is shared between the 2 ports. If power is shared between the ports, they must each be able to provide a minimum of 150 kilowatts. This example shows a battery energy storage system as part of the power supply. Now we'll go over a few examples of what would not meet the RFP requirements. This example does not have a CCS connector and NACS connector on every port. In this example, the ports power share to below 150 kilowatts. Even if each port supports 150 kilowatts individually, this does not meet the requirement. In this example, the transformer is under capacity and does not provide 150 kilowatts to all ports simultaneously. Even if each port supports 150 kilowatts individually, this does not meet the requirement. In this case, the chargers do not support at least 350 amp output on all ports. For this example, the battery energy storage system cannot replace utility power supply unless additional requirements on battery size and utility connection are met. The NEVI funding comes from both federal and state sources. This means there are many requirements for administration, implementation, and use. I'm going to touch on the requirements in terms of laws and regulations that apply, requirements that will supplement the application, award requirements, and post-award requirements. These requirements are fully disclosed in the RFP package and references. A few of the highlights are included in this slide. All applicable requirements of Title 23 United States Code of Regulations and 2 CFR Part 200 apply to the administration of these funds, which include but are not limited to 23 CFR 680, the Davis-Bacon Act, FHWA Form 1273, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, and the Build America, Buy America Act. Projects funded under any agreement resulting from this RFP will be covered by the Build America, Buy America Implementation Plan, to enhance Buy America for electric vehicle chargers. MnDOT will require Buy America documentation from grantees. In addition to these requirements, the grantee must comply with all other standards and requirements that may be required by federal, state, and local laws. We've already reviewed the parts of the application, but there are a few that deserve a bit more explanation. A letter from the site owner is required at the time of the application. Part of the NEVI program is to assure public access to the proposed site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year for the life of the agreement. The letter must come from the site owner and make specific statements about access for the life of the agreement and rights to MnDOT to enter the property. After a conditional award is made, MnDOT has pre-award requirements covered in Section 8 of the RFP. These are risk-based audit and financial reviews required by the MnDOT NEVI program. This phase will also require a signed site host agreement, a signed letter from the utility, a letter of credit from a bank or financial institution, and proof of registration to do business in Minnesota. Under the pre-award phase, it is worth noting that applicants cannot incur or agree to pay any costs to be requested for reimbursement prior to the execution of the agreement. We are now in the post-award phase. At this point, our successful applicants have become grantees and will be eligible to invoice MnDOT in accordance with the requirements. MnDOT will provide an invoice form for grantees to use. It will require that grantees include cost share for each line item. Cost reimbursement for construction will be invoiced quarterly upon compliance with the reporting requirements detailed in Attachment 2, Scope of Work and Deliverables. MnDOT will withhold 20% of each reimbursement invoice. Of this withholding, 20% will be released on an annual basis at the time of the final O&M payment of the year, if all performance requirements and obligations of the agreement are met. During the O&M period, deductions will occur from the final quarterly O&M payment of each year when the invoice for reimbursement is submitted. For each percentage point or fraction thereof that the 97% uptime is not met on a per port basis, per the NEVI rule, $1,000 will be deducted from that quarter's O&M payment. The uptime will be calculated during the month the invoice is submitted for the prior 12 months of operation. If there is no remaining O&M payment for the deduction to be subtracted from, the amount will be deducted from the remaining construction withholding. Once deducted, the funds can never be reclaimed. The grantee is not allowed to make more than a reasonable return on investment on the project. Reasonable return on investment on the project is defined as no more than 15% annual profit on the project. The profit calculation is included in Section 9 of the RFP and includes several examples. So let's transition for a moment to how MnDOT is accepting applications for this RFP. You'll find the online application link on the MnDOT NEVI webpage. The form will walk you through the required fields. The first section requires the lead applicant to enter their Minnesota SWIFT vendor ID, federal tax ID, and unique entity identifier, along with the registered vendor's name and mailing address. The next section is where you would enter the primary point of contact name, phone number, and email address. This information will be what MnDOT uses to gain applicant clarifications if necessary. Next, you will select the AFC corridor you are applying to, the cluster name, and the exit number. Remember, you can only submit one application per cluster. Next, you will attach all 4 required elements of the application. Friendly reminder that documents must be submitted in the required format and be searchable. Lastly, you will need to read the notices, click the acknowledgement box, and hit submit to send the application to MnDOT. If you hit cancel, the form will clear and nothing will be sent to MnDOT. The system will only allow an applicant to submit one application per cluster. If you need to alter or resubmit a different application, you must send an email to neviproject.dot@state.mn.us. The deadline to apply is noon Central Standard Time on January 13th, 2025. Once MnDOT receives your application, it will sit in a holding area until the close of the RFP period. Then it will be formally sent to the NEVI contract manager to begin a multi-step evaluation process. All applications will be reviewed for responsiveness to confirm the application meets the RFP requirements. The responsiveness check is a two-step pass-fail assessment. The first step is a non-technical responsiveness check. This includes checks for things like making sure all required forms are complete in the correct format and signed. Applications that fail the non-technical responsiveness check will be determined to be non-responsive and will not be evaluated further. If an applicant or application fails to meet one or more of the requirements detailed in Attachment 3, Technical Application Form, it may be determined to be non-responsive. The second step is a technical responsiveness check. This includes checks to ensure that the proposed equipment and site meet the minimum technical requirements of the NEVI program and the RFP. Applications that fail the technical responsiveness check will be determined to be non-responsive and will not be evaluated further. If an applicant or application fails to meet one or more of the requirements detailed in Attachment 3, Technical Application Form, it may be determined to be non-responsive. Applications that pass the responsiveness checks will be scored based on their technical merit. Each application will be independently scored by the members of a review committee that is made up of at least 3 members, and the individual scores in each category will be averaged to give the final score for the application. Applications will be scored in several different categories, with a total of 175 points available in the technical evaluation. Full details on the scoring criteria for the technical evaluation can be found in the RFP package. The cost evaluation will be calculated based on an objective formula that compares the cost of the proposal to the lowest cost from all responsible applications. The cost proposal scores will be separated by cluster. The lowest cost proposal in each cluster will get 25 points, while more expensive proposals will receive fewer points that scale based on how much the cost increases. The final score for each application is the sum of the technical proposal score and the cost proposal score. A maximum of 200 points is available, and the review committee will make award recommendations based on which application receives the most points in each cluster. The RFP application for Round 2 is open now, and questions can be submitted by email through December 20th, 2024. MnDOT will post responses weekly on Tuesdays. The application period will close on January 13th, 2025. Staff will review and score the applications. Our goal is to complete the review within a 90-day time period, but that is dependent on the number of applications received. After the scoring is complete, MnDOT will contact applicants to offer conditional awards. We appreciate your interest in the Minnesota NEVI program. Please email any questions to neviproject.dot@state.mn.us, and if alternative formats are needed, contact MnDOT